What is up, ninjas? My name is Sam World, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make some shitty ass bass lines like shitty techno producer IO, as a lot of you shitty producers out there have been requesting it so you guys can sound like. Now, if you guys haven't read IO and No Mana has read it, you know, it's all a joke, guys. I'm not, take the shitty out of the intro and that's the real intro. Today we will learn how to make some dope bass lines though, like IO's tracks, as you guys have been requesting it a lot. Now, his style is a bit iffy because he has a little bit of the G house, trancey, and techno vibe going on in his music, which a lot of people seem to like. Now, for this tutorial, guys, I've recreated two of his tracks. The first one's going to be a more trancey infused one that he released under Andrew Rayos' label. I believe it's called This Is Not Techno. And then the second one is going to be his track Low, which I believe released under Mouse Trap. Now, the first one, This Is Not Techno, is going to be more of a trancey style of, progressive trance style of track. And the next one is going to be more of a G house with a little bit of trance influences in it. So today we're going to be looking at those, guys. It took me about an hour to 2 hours to get this ready for you guys, but I'm sure you're going to be learning a lot of cool stuff that you guys can use in your own production. Now, a few extra tips I want to leave you guys with before we go into Ableton. If you're trying to recreate the IO dirty bass lines, the very gritty ones, it is very wise for you to pick keys, scales that are not so high up. What I mean by this is a lot of people like to pick the scale of G, A, G sharp, F sharp, F. And the reason for that is that the sub is at its biggest there. It sounds at its hugest. However, these are going to be bad scales to go with if you really want a gritty, a dirty, a very mid-low bass sound, which IO has in some of his other tracks. For instance, if you're trying to get a dirtier vibe in your bass, go with scales like, E, D, D sharp. Those scales are very dirty. They're super low. The sub isn't as big there, but it will allow a lot of your bass lines to sound dirtier instantly, as you're going to have to rely more on the mid-lows to get that pumping bass to make it sound fatter and bigger, as the sub isn't really going to carry the track as much as if it was in the key of G or A. And the last tip I'll give you guys before we get started is when you do your sound design, try and stick with more analog-based waveforms, okay? So if you're inside of Serum, avoid using spectral, wavetables, digital wavetables, and go more for like the traditional analog wavetables like the squares, the saws, the triangles, the sine waves, and then distort them, get them to sound heavy. Use low pass filters properly. Use this to your advantage, guys, because as you're going to see in this tutorial, most of the bass lines are going to be analog waveforms. But with that being said, guys, if you guys want to support my channel, make sure to check out evilsounds.com. If you're looking for bass lines in this style, make sure to check out the Confessions G House sound set series. It's going to have a lot of cool bass lines that fit the style of IO, and that's the best way to support my channel, guys. You guys get some cool sounds in return, and I get to keep making videos for you guys as you guys support my endeavors here on YouTube. With that being said, let's get started. All right, guys, and welcome inside of Ableton. Now, the drop we're going to be doing first is going to sound like this. Now, the mix needs a bit of work. This track took me about like 30 minutes to 45 to recreate and get it to where it sounds like. Here I have the reference, okay? Now, this track is, again, going to be more of a trancey infusion, still the IO style, but, a lot of bass layers on this one and a lot of interesting stuff we need to talk about. The first thing is that the sub isn't following the bass, okay? That's the first thing that you need to understand. The sub is literally ran all the way through in the key of G sharp or A flat. Now, as we talked about already, this is going to be more of a track where the sub is really at its biggest. So for this, subs, usually a sine wave will suffice. Now, when you're looking at recreating subs, guys, usually sine waves are good for G, key of A, G sharp, G, F sharp. The reason for that is that the sub is very dominant here with the sine wave. Now, if I were to bring this down to, let's say, D, where it sounds, you can see the sub's really not that present. So one of the more traditional waves to use would be more of a triangle as a sub, as it's more gritty and it allows more mid-lows to come through. I always considered the triangle more of a saturated version of the sine wave. But here the sine works great for this drop, and it's just going to be ran all the way through with a very heavy sidechain, which essentially turns it into an offbeat bass. Okay, there's a decapitator on it just to give it a little bit more oomph to it, so a little bit more of those mid-lows, and that's about. This is more subby, and this has a little bit more body to it. So the decapitator from Soundsearch is great for that. So that's the sub in this track. Now, this track I really like because it's unique in the sense that it uses a lot of bass layers. The first one that we have here, you can consider a bass or not, but it's going to be the bleep. Now, creating blips, guys, is gonna utilize a sine wave, okay? And the idea of the bleep, it's pretty much there's this envelope that is changing the pitch of the sine so fast, going from high to bottom. Think of it like you pull a slingshot and let go. But imagine that happening in milliseconds. So that's essentially what we have. We have a sine wave here, and and pretty much we're routing an envelope to the pitch of it. So we can do that here, pitch AB. We're gonna route it to the right here. This is gonna be the amount we're adding to that pitch modulation. So if I have it low, so the higher you go, the more higher frequency you get there. So that's going to be there. The decay is going to control how fast it happens. So if I have a high decay, no, it's not. Your decay is too high that it's not reaching the bottom, the note we're playing, which is essentially a bass note. So we have to lower that decay low so that we get that nice thing. Now here we can make the decay longer if you want, and then have and that sounds good as well. Okay, but the idea here is, again, to create these bleeps, you just utilize pretty much a sine wave, and the effect is created by the switch in time. Now, this is a bass, and the key thing you have to realize, guys, when you're layering a bunch of bass lines together is that you want to place them somewhere in the mix. So this one is more in the mono signal. It's a little bit more high bass. There's a bit of mids there, but it's really not taking up much except the highs, okay? Now the next layer we have is going to be following that. Oh, by the way, before the sidechain is heavy on this one as well. We do have a rolling bass, but pretty much here it's so big that you barely hear the first hit in it. So it's more of a ta-ta gallops, horse gallops, ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta. But you still have that third one, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. But since you have such a heavy sidechain, you still get that ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. So you get the horse gallops, okay? This is a good technique to have. It adds a lot of drive to the track, okay? And then it's just mixed like this for now. There's a bit more we can do with it for sure. Probably play around with it to get it to sound more like the original. But essentially, this is as close as I could get in the time frame that I had. The next one we have here is going to be more of a knock style of bass. You hear this a lot in IO's tracks as well. So this one is funny because you're utilizing, again, a sine wave in the same format we utilized it for the bleep. But instead, we're making it so that it's more low-end dependent. You can say it sounds like a kick, and it is. But the way we create this one, guys, and this one was made in Serum, is, again, a sine wave. We're using envelope 3, decay low, and we're routing that to our CRS here. Here we're going to pull up. Okay, and then we have a low. Get rid of some of those highs we don't really need, because remember, the bleep bass, it's on top. So you want them to get along. We don't want them to fight. And then from that, we just have the tube. So here we just kind of put this up. But that's going to kind of be another layer in the bass. So now we have. And I messed that up completely there. But, before that, you kind of got the idea of it. So essentially here, the bass too, we're making it very plucky. Okay, and it's very crucial you get this right. Now, the next sound we have, guys, is going to be a saw sound with a little bit of white noise if you want to add it. The cool thing with the saw is that you cannot go wrong with it, and just a bit of distortion, proper distortion in OT gets it to sound really tight and really kind of like, maybe a bit more mid-lows would have been wiser, but you got to keep in mind you still have that going, so it might be better just to not have it, so they don't fight. The other thing here is just distortion, compression, and then the saw. You can add a bit of noise to it, so it gets a nice little grittiness on the top. You can do that with white noise. Good technique for G-House bass lines, techno bass lines like Res, like 1788L, Matroda bass lines, whatever you want to make. It's a cool technique to. And that's going to give us that nice bass here, OTT again, and then we're just cutting. And then this one is going to have more of an offbeat kind of vibe to this. And then we're layering that with another saw that is a bit more detuned. So this saw is going to be more for, in essence, more for the stereo. The key thing with it, though, is, we're just having saws detuned there, which in essence is going to create that nice width to it. Super soft kind of sound, a bit of white noise, of course. We use a diode distortion. It's a little bit more gritty, and we got rid of some lows there. The sound is still playing at the lowest possible frequency, and then some EQ here. Now, here's a trick here. When you hear the IO track, it doesn't have a very, very huge stereo image. This saw doesn't. You know, you could have it that way, which sounds... Now, the reason the last bass is centered, guys, because in the stereo field, IO has opted to use a super saw in a low octave and turned it punchy. Now, what that means is here we have a super saw. Okay, it's going to have it sustain all the way low, and then we're running it through a filter so we get more of a shot like that. So this is going to cover the stereo field, okay? Of course, we're getting rid of lows, even though this has low information. We don't want the lows because, remember, we already have that big sub going. We have those mid-low basses going, so we're going to cut a lot of this low stuff so that we make room for it in the stereo. And that's going to be our stereo sound there. This one's easily made, again, super saw. 7 voices, 5 detuned. That's going to create that. And then we're just going to route it through a low pass 24, which is a more strict version. Because like that, it sounds like that. But if we go more strict, that's going to allow it so that less highs are allowed out. Distortion and compression, OTT. And of course, a side chain. It doesn't have to be that heavy, even though it's not needed because it's hitting on the offbeats. But still, it's a good sound to have. And then we get... And you just want to make sure it's heard. That's the biggest. Okay, and then finally we have one last bass that's more of a... Okay, it's going to be more like so. And again, it's just a super saw, and this time we're using an LFO to open it up slowly. That creates more of a wub, so that way we have this. Okay, and then we have the shot. And I didn't get it like his, you know, I didn't want to spend too much time trying to figure that one out. But in essence, that's how we create this track that IO has. So a lot of bass layers on this one, as you can see. We're going to have all those, and put together we create... So again, I understand this needs a little bit more work on the mix, but that's the idea. That's the concept that he has in his tracks. It sounds dirty. It sounds very gritty. This one is more sub-dominant, but that's how we get those layers. So when you work in your song, the thing I hope you get out of this one is that you need to have multiple layers of bass lines to make something interesting. And, you know, you can use knocks, you can use kicks, you can use clicks, you can use different sounds, you know, use the stereo image properly. That's one thing I liked about this song. It's not techno, not techno. It's a good song, and that's how the basses were created. Similar vibe, and as you guys saw, it's all analog techniques. It's just the bass lines are used in such a way that gives you a nice dirty sound. Now for the second track, this is the closest I could get. Again, it's all in the mix. The kick needs to be a little bit heavier, but other than that, all the sounds are super close. Okay, so this is how it's gonna sound like. This is the original. So we're going to talk about the sounds. It's, you know, obviously it's just the mix that needs a little bit of work, but the sounds are all going to be very similar. Okay, now this track is pretty cool. There's some cool stuff in here. The first one is that right as the song starts, you hit with like this weird thing where you have the kick playing, but then you also have this offbeat kick, or you can call it a tom. Now you can make this sound differently. Like you can definitely have it like. But that's the first thing that we have in this track. Okay, again, this is going to have a couple of bass layers, so you got to be really careful. A lot of IO stuff is like multiple bass, multiple perks that act as bass shots in a way. But that's the first thing. Okay, once we have that, the bass, the first one, the main one in the track is going to sound like really weird. It's sort of like a respace, but there's a couple of tricks to it that I want to talk about. Now, first things first, we have a saw that is going to be in mono here, one voice on it. Essentially, that's guaranteeing that it sounds like a saw. Okay, next one we have is the super. That's what's gonna give the bass like a weird vibe. Like it doesn't make sense, but it's kind of dirty as hell. Now, the other thing we've done is we've gone into the global section and we've made this layer here be fully mono, because when you put more than one voice, you start to create stereo. Especially when you do detunement, what tends to happen is your saws get panned left and right and they get detuned, so it gives you stereo. However, we don't want that. If you do it, that's totally fine. It's gonna sound wide, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's just the style that you want to have with it. From there, we're just distorting this, because here it sounds like a standard read. Now when we distort it, it gets really gritty, really dirty, and that is the key to it. Now, if I don't have any of this processing, this is how this sounds. It sounds very dirty, as you guys can see. Bit of OTT, get rid of that. Okay, below that we have a sub just to control. Now, the reason for this sub, guys, is going to be a triangle wave. You know, we didn't want to go with a sine because, as you guys know, if I go with a sine wave on this, can't really hear it. But if I go with that triangle, now it's more noticeable. A little bit of distortion just. And then we're just going to EQ out the stuff we don't need because we have other sounds carrying that. Okay. Now, the next thing we have is this wide square saw hybrid. You can make it 2 saws, 2 squares. It sounds similar. But in essence, what this is doing, it's like a very dark, just Stein, however you say his name, style of bass. And it's just going on the offbeat. Duh, duh, duh. Okay. Again, it's EQ to get rid of the lows because we already have so much low. We have a Hasse. Really doesn't do much, so really it's not needed there. So here we just have a saw, 5 voices detuned, that gives a stereo, and then a square, 3 voices detuned, that gives a stereo. And then we're running that through a low pass. If we take it, you know, that's not what we want. But we want that low pass to shape the sound. So we grab our envelope, lower the sustain because we're trying to make a punchy sound, and we can use the decay to how punchy we want it. We route that to our low pass filter here where we open it, not all the way, because you get that, but more around there. So it's kind of like an offbeat bass. Once we have that, that's pretty much it on it, really. But the key is this sound here. This sound is what creates the dirtiness in the track. And the cool thing with this, guys, is that, like I stated, you want to use analog stuff. But for instance, let's say I decide to go with something a little different. You can make various variations for this style of bass. You know, here, the biggest one you can use is a square. And the reason I like the square is because it sounds a lot heavier than a... Now you can make it more punch. I guess that works too, because I mean, but it just depends on the track. But again, guys, the idea in creating these bass lines is really going to be what we talked about before this. I just wanted to show you guys some variations you can do in that cool stuff. Play around with perks and whatnot, but I hope you guys had fun. I hope you find this tutorial useful. Now, key thing, I do have a masters going on in these tracks, so that's... You know, they sound kind of like already fucking loud. So I do have these kind of fake masters. I like to use the Ozone master, like this preset called Grab Kelby High Detail Compressed one. I think it sounds fine. And usually it gets you to where you need to be. But again, hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below, guys. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Take care and peace out.